This happened at our family's remote cabin in the forests of Montana. The cabin is in a very isolated area, with the nearest neighbor living about 2 miles up a dirt road on the mountain. We decided to head to the cabin in mid-May, right after school got out, but we couldn't have a fire because the wood was too wet from the spring rains. My family drove up from southern Washington, joined by my 2 uncles and their kids. My mom, stepbrother, and I were also there, but no one else was around. The first night went smoothly. We spent the evening drinking root beer, at least for me since I was 12, shooting cans with BB guns and playing poker and other card games. We had a dinner of spaghetti, followed by roasting marshmallows, before heading to bed around 10:30. To understand the strange events that followed, you need to know the layout of the cabin. On the left side of the house, there's a staircase lined with old Christmas lights we never bothered to take down. On the second floor, there's a hallway with a balcony on the right side that overlooks the dining area and living room. On the left side of the hall, there are 3 doors, each leading to a bedroom. The first bedroom has 1 bed and no windows, and since there's no attic, the ceiling is around 25 to 28 feet high. In the second bedroom, where I slept with the other kids, there were 2 bunk beds and 1 regular bed. I slept on the top bunk on the right side, my stepbrother on the bottom bunk, and my cousins on the other bunk bed. There's a single window about 18 feet above the second story, so it's roughly 28 feet off the ground, facing the deep woods. That night, I lay in bed, wide awake thanks to my messed up sleep schedule. I found myself staring at the treetops illuminated by the moonlight when suddenly, a pale creature darted across the window. Keep in mind, this window is on a flat wall 28 feet up with no windowsill. The creature looked drained of blood, with deep red stains covering its skin. Naturally, as a brave 12-year-old, I let out a scream, my voice alternating between silent gasps and high-pitched screeches thanks to those awkward pubescent voice cracks. I woke up everyone in the cabin, and my cousin, who was 12 as well, fell off his bunk, thankfully without getting hurt. A few minutes later, I was surrounded by panicked family members, asking what was wrong. I had to explain to 3 adults and 2 younger kids about the terrifying pale figure, 28 feet off the ground, covered in blood. They told me it was probably just a vivid dream, but I insisted I had been awake the entire time. They told me to put on my shoes, and we went outside to check the window, but there was nothing there. The next day, I looked up at the back wall and noticed something we had missed the night before. Tiny scratches, about the size of pine needles, moving diagonally across the window, heading up towards the roof before abruptly stopping. I also noticed a tree limb had fallen from the tree near the end of the scratch marks, and it had deep scratches along the bottom and top. Naturally, I was freaked out for the rest of the day. I also noticed that the beer cans we had been shooting at were gone. I figured the adults had thrown them out, but then I found one about 50 feet away, riddled with holes and strange tears. It was odd, especially since we had portable trash cans, but I didn't dwell on it too much. The day continued much like the first, with us eating leftover spaghetti and going to bed around 10:45. I fell asleep around 12:10, but woke up almost immediately at 1 o'clock, thirsty for a glass of water. As I went downstairs, I heard tapping on the side door of the kitchen. Completely petrified, I stood still as a statue, watching in horror as a long, bony finger with an extra joint tapped on the glass. The creature's wrist was coming from the bottom of the glass, meaning it was crouching while tapping on the window. I slowly backed up the stairs, but halfway up, the tapping stopped. I froze as I heard footsteps moving around the cabin to the back, followed by scratching sounds climbing up the wall, and then a blood-curdling scream from my room. My youngest cousin had been awake when I got up for water, and they had heard the scratching and also saw the creature climb up the window. We left the cabin on the 3rd day. When we got home, we found the bars on our window bent. Those bars had been installed after a bear broke the window the previous year, and it had taken a vise and hammer to get them into place. The way the bars were bent this time suggested the creature had pushed them up towards the window, meaning this pale monster with the 5-jointed fingers was stronger than my very strong uncle. The adults never told us kids, but later in the year they went back to replace the furnace and fix the bars. They were able to have a fire this time, but that night they felt like they were constantly being watched and heard strange tapping on the side of the house. They brushed it off as the walls creaking, but since then, I've never slept easily at that cabin. Eventually, we sold the cabin, and I haven't had any paranormal experiences since. I have a small outbuilding next to my house, where I keep a TV and sometimes spend my evenings unwinding with a movie. One night, my partner was visiting, and we decided to watch a new release out in the shed. The setup there is pretty nice, so it's often more comfortable than watching in the house. I usually leave the back door open when I head out to the shed, especially since I live in a quiet, safe neighborhood with little worry about intruders. At the time, I had an elderly dog, a small mix of Pomeranian and Maltese, who was nearly deaf and blind. Her sight had almost completely gone, and she often wandered aimlessly around the house, likely due to dementia setting in. After the movie, we headed back inside. I went to the bathroom and noticed the usual sounds of my dog padding around the house were absent. Normally, she'd be roaming the rooms, but this time, there was nothing. My partner and I started searching the house, checking every corner, but she was nowhere to be found. It suddenly occurred to us that she might have somehow made her way outside through the open back door. To leave the house, she would have had to navigate from the hallway through my bedroom and then off a raised porch that stands about 4 to 5 feet above the ground. Given her blindness, it seemed impossible, but we decided to check outside just in case. We searched around the porch, expecting to find some sign of her, but there was nothing. No sign of a fall, no noises while we were in the shed, nothing at all. It was as if she had vanished. There's a small wooded area behind my house, and we thought she might have wandered into it. We began to explore the woods, shining our phone flashlights into the darkness. As we moved deeper, I suddenly heard the sound of leaves rustling nearby. Thinking it might be my dog, I pointed my flashlight toward the noise, but what I saw wasn't her. Instead, I saw a figure wearing a hood, standing about 15 or 20 feet away. They seemed to freeze as my light hit them. I quickly turned to my partner and whispered that someone was out here and we should head back. Just as I was about to move, I heard the leaves crunching again. When I shined my light back to where the figure had been, I was stunned. The figure had transformed, or at least it seemed like it, into a tall, thin, gray shape that bolted to the left, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. The sight sent chills through my entire body, from my head down to my toes. I was so frightened that I ran back to the house, almost forgetting my partner in my haste. When we were safely inside, I asked her what she had seen. She hadn't seen the figure, but she had heard the rapid rustling of leaves as if something was speeding through the woods. We never found my dog, nor any trace that she had even left the house. Despite searching every nook and cranny and putting up posts about her disappearance, she was never found. To this day, I wonder if what I saw that night was somehow connected to her disappearance. I can't help but overthink it, imagining that whatever that figure was might have entered my home while the door was open. I've never experienced anything like that since, but the memory of that night stays with me. I'm more cautious when I go out to the shed now, always feeling uneasy when I catch a glimpse of the woods out of the corner of my eye. The day after the incident, we even went back to the woods, searching for any sign of the strange figure or my dog, but found nothing. I still wish I knew what happened to her, but at least I know she's not suffering anymore. It was the night of September 20th, and a meteor shower was gracing the skies. My curiosity got the best of me, so I decided to head out late to catch a glimpse. It was exactly 1 a.m. when I stepped outside. I stood in the middle of the quiet street in front of my house, gazing up at the clear night sky, watching comets streak across the darkness. I was alone, surrounded by the stillness of the night. Across the road from my house, there's an expanse of dense forest that stretches for miles, untamed and eerie. Living in British Columbia for 6 years, I've heard the local legends about the Wendigo, a a creature feared in these parts. As I stood there, mesmerized by the celestial display, I began to hear odd noises. It sounded like the snap of a twig coming from directly in front of me, maybe 100 yards away. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to it. However, after that night, I did some research and the pieces fell into place. The strange events that unfolded led me to believe that I might have encountered something far more terrifying than I initially thought. The sound was distant, but I remembered reading a story where someone mentioned that the further away a Wendigos noises seem, the closer it actually is. Barely 10 seconds later, I heard strange sounds coming from the left side of my house, only about 50 feet away. Living in this area for years, I've become familiar with the usual nocturnal sounds like rabbits or coyotes, but this was different. It was a sound I'd never heard before, and it sent a wave of dread through me. A deep, primal fear took over, making me feel like something terrible was about to happen. Then, as abruptly as they began, the noises stopped, but the silence didn't last long. I began to hear faint voices where the sounds had come from. It sounded like a young girl, but the words were indistinguishable, quiet, faint, almost gibberish, but I was sure it was a female voice. Then, clear as day, twice as loud as before, I heard my name, Lucas, in the voice of a little girl, coming from the same direction. At that moment, terror gripped me. I started walking back towards my front door, trying to rationalize what had just happened. I remembered reading that Wendigos are known to mimic human voices, especially those of people they've heard, to lure their prey. I also read that they often stalk around homes, waiting for the perfect moment. My heart was pounding as I reached the bottom of my driveway, heading for the safety of my front door. I heard the gravel crunch on my right side. The sound was heavy, deliberate, like footsteps, no more than 20 feet away. I couldn't see anything. It was too dark, and the steps were on the other side of my neighbor's car. Panic surged through me, but I resisted the urge to call out. Something in my gut told me that acknowledging whatever was out there would only make things worse. I tried to stay calm, even though every fiber of my being was screaming in terror. I was now at the top of the driveway, just a few feet from the door. The footsteps on both sides of me quickened, closing in. I ignored the sounds as best as I could, focusing on getting inside. I finally reached the door, flung it open, and locked it behind me, my hands shaking. But the fear didn't end there. That sense of dread clung to me. I secured the house, locked the back door, put the cover on the dog door, made sure all the windows were shut. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave. Everyone else was asleep, so I went to my sister's room, hoping she was awake. She wasn't, but in her sleep, she mumbled that I could come in. I sat on the floor, praying nothing else would happen. Of course, my sister's the only one who keeps her blinds up at night, and the screen on her window had fallen off weeks ago. It was just glass now, and I could see the entire backyard. If something was out there, it could see me too. I stayed in her room for about 15 minutes when suddenly, I heard faint whistling. It was soft, but it was coming from the backyard. The whistling grew louder and started to sound like a flute. My heart raced as I realized it might be related to the legends I'd read. Perhaps the flute of a Wendigo or some other malevolent spirit. That was it for me. I got up, told my sister good night, and left her room. I was too frightened to sleep, so I turned on some lights and sat at the kitchen bar. I even considered waking up my dad, just so I wouldn't be alone, but I decided against it. Then, I heard the gravel crunching again, this time from the backyard. Whatever it was close, only a few feet away from the back door. Then, a soft knock on the glass door. At first, I didn't register it, but it persisted. One knock every minute, steady and deliberate. My fear reached a new height. Something was on the other side of that door, and I wasn't about to find out what. I turned off the lights and headed to my room, not daring to look at the door. I stayed there for the rest of the night, too terrified to sleep. Even then, I could hear strange noises outside my window, but I forced myself to ignore them. The next morning, everything seemed normal, but the memory of that night still haunts me. I'm glad I trusted my instincts and didn't engage with whatever was out there. Who knows what could have happened if I hadn't? Please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more horror stories.